Hello, my name is Professor Bendistis, and this is the first video lecture for Cyberlaw in light of the recent cancellations for class. I'm going to try to propose doing some video lectures for class, but then also holding classes over Zoom. This is probably how the rest of the semester is going to go, so these videos are obviously very important to make sure that everything's done. The first thing I would suggest that everyone do is just double check the syllabus. The syllabus obviously is going to be subject to some amendments, so I'll probably post a video sometime shortly when we figure out the logistics of how everything's going to work. My understanding is that classes will be held via Zoom, which is information that I'm sure you'll receive very shortly. And we'll have video lectures just like everything else, and I'll kind of do the normal talking with the PowerPoints that you'll probably see up here. And then we'll kind of cover class at the same time, usually in the same forum. So we'll talk about like 5:30 on Wednesday night up until that's finished. For right now, I just wanted to give a little bit of background information concerning the class and also the legal system, especially for the students who do not have any background in that system. And I think that'll probably be helpful for the future to make sure everything's there. The other thing I'm going to note is that your book in this class could not be more important this semester than it ever has in the past. Being able to get the book to be able to understand where everything's going, to be able to read on your own is imperative because that's really going to be kind of where everything is. Additionally, your homework assignments, which you have 2 homework assignments, which I'm going to talk about later, are also going to be graded on a more substantive value than maybe previous classes I've had because I don't get the same amount of time to touch base with you as I have before. So I'm asking for 2 case briefs this semester where I'm putting 2 cases with the information highlighted, and I want you to ask 4 questions, and I would like them to be somewhat detailed, kind of reflecting your understanding of both how the law operates and how these cases operate. Now I'm going to go through all that in general, but just keeping in mind that these videos are incredibly important. So my hope and my expectation is that you're watching all of these. Now, for the first video in general, I'll note I'm going to talk about the background of the legal justice system. So for those of you who have had me in class before, it's very likely that a lot of this will seem very familiar. So if you've had me and you understand the difference between jurisdiction, the federal and the state government, this may be something where you could skim through, let's say, instead of avoiding. But if you haven't, I think that this is really imperative that you give yourselves time to be able to understand it, and you email me with any questions that you may have, because my guess is that the reading and the homework assignments may seem very difficult. My expectation is I'll give you more information about how class will be covered in the future, but I do want to make sure that I have some expectations now. My expectation, as far as class goes, is that I'll kind of be doing my classes like I normally do, where after the 4th week of class, we will have a take-home midterm, and then the final exam will again be a take-home final. Those exams will be open note, open book, and they will be done almost exclusively based on the tests and the work that we do in these assignments. So again, these video lectures and the Zoom lectures are going to be incredibly important, probably more so than they ever have in the past. In general, everything else I'd say is somewhat flexible. Obviously, I'll be having homework assignments every single week, but I do want to make sure that we continue to teach the class just like we always would, and that everything makes sense the way that it always would. The first thing I want to talk about in general when it comes to the law is the idea of jurisdiction. Now, jurisdiction is the ability of the court to hear your case. And this is really important when we talk about the difference between the federal government and the state government, which are 2 big differences that I think a lot of people take, frankly, for granted. For example, right now, as you sit, you are governed by both the federal government and the state government, the United States of America and the state of Delaware. Now, the way that those are separated is that the federal government is the primary government that controls all of the United States. Anything the federal government wants to do, it's generally allowed to do. It has superiority over the state government, but it can only act via the ways that have been prescribed in the Constitution, meaning that Congress can only act via Article 1 of the Constitution, the President can only act via Article 2 of the Constitution, and the court can only act via Article 3. Now, as long as they're acting within what they're allowed to do, they're perfectly fine and no one can contradict them. There are ways that you can contradict their jurisdiction, but that's something we can talk about a little bit later. On the other end, you have the state government. Now, every state has their own individualized governments. For example, Delaware has their own law, Pennsylvania has their own law, so on and so forth. And normally how that works is that everything not left to the federal government is reserved to the states. So things like criminal law, civil law, family law, real estate law are almost exclusively reserved to state governments. Now, why I bring that up is that a lot of the things we're going to talk about throughout the rest of the semester are going to deal with both federal and state law. We're going to talk about intellectual property, which is primarily a federal government operation because it deals with things like interstate commerce, and it also deals with a right that's protected in the federal Constitution, which is your intellectual property. Now, the things we're going to talk about later today and next week are things regarding the civil justice system, the ability for one person to sue another person. Now, that's going to be mostly state governments. Now, we're going to talk about things that cross over both lines. Criminal law, for example, in cyber law is a very federal and state regulation. Contract law, frankly, is kind of federal and state regulation. So I just want you to be aware of the fact that anytime you're reading cases or reading laws, by and large, what you're mostly going to be dealing with is a little bit of both. Now, for those of you who have had class in the past, things like criminal law is almost exclusively state law. Now, this doesn't change your understanding of it. I mean, it's usually the law is the law. But I just want to make sure that you're aware of the fact that those two differences are somewhat important, and they're going to play into a lot of the issues we're going to talk about later on in class. The other fundamental concept that we have to make sure that makes sense as far as class goes is the idea of stare decisis and precedent. Now, stare decisis and precedent are the key fundamental tenets of how our American justice system operates. In a sentence, it says that we decide current cases, current disputes between parties, the same as previous cases that were decided on similar facts in a similar jurisdiction, which is why I brought up that word. Now, the reason why I bring this up is that you're going to be reading a lot of cases within my class. And in particular, in regard to your homework, I'm going to ask you to read 2 cases, right? That seems very easy, but you're going to read that they're very complex. The idea in general here is that when we have a new dispute between people, we look to old cases to decide how to resolve the current dispute. And that's really every single United States legal decision, bar none, right? That's the Supreme Court of the United States. That's Justice of the Peace Court where you get a parking ticket. So the essential idea is we look at a dispute, we review old law, and we see how that old law commands us to make a decision in our current law. Now, the reason why we do that is because it's both fair and it's predictable. The idea being that we want people to be able to make their behavior around what they expect the law to be. For example, if I had a contract with you that said that if I breached the contract by, I don't know, teaching online, that would be a problem and that I would be in trouble, right? I would therefore expect that if that happened, that I would maybe get in trouble. So the idea in general here is we want to make sure that people know how to conform their behavior and that it's fair. They expect what they're able to do. The same thing would be with consistency, meaning consistency is that we want decisions to be decided every single way all the way through. So why that plays up in this case is a lot of the slides I'm going to be giving you are going to be like elements of a test and how they work forward. Those elements are incredibly important because your midterm and your final are just going to be hypothetical situations, and I'm going to ask you to apply the law that we've discussed in class to predict the law in the future. I'm going to show you how to probably do that next week by giving you some extra lecture videos, but I do want to make sure you know, like, that's the basic thing that I'm testing. Your ability to get the rules out of old cases and apply them in new cases. Now, when we talk about rules, I'm going to briefly discuss this here. I'm going to discuss it more in a little bit. But we're really talking about statutes and common law. Statutes being legislative passed law, things that the legislator passes, things like, you can't drive drunk, right? You have to pay your taxes. Laws about what you're allowed to do with your house, how mortgages are done, right? There's a million laws in the Delaware Code that decide and conform our conduct to a certain level. On the other end, common law are court-made law, things that judges are allowed to decide depending on the circumstances of the decision. I always think of this as like King Solomon law. King Solomon is the old story about, the king who was proposed. There was 2 people who had a baby. They said, hey, this is my baby. And King Solomon said, well, I'm going to cut the baby down in half. Whoever objects the most is the mother. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. But the idea being that judge made a decision based on kind of their intuition. And that's what we allow judges to do. We allow judges to apply elements, create rules, and make decisions moving forward. And that's a fundamental basis of how all the law works. And you're probably going to see that a lot. And to that end, every decision that you're going to be reading about covers 2 main things. The first one being resolving the immediate dispute. If A sues B, A wins $10,000. Fantastic, right? But the other issue is that we have to provide guidance on future disputes. So in every decision, not only are you deciding whether or not A can sue B or whether A wins, but if parties are similarly situated in the future, that we can also predict the outcome there. So why this is mostly important and why this is mostly applicable in class is that when you read the book and when you read these decisions, it's of the utmost importance that you're trying to read what's the rule, what's the point, what's the idea that we're talking about, because that is really what we're going to be testing on in the future, right? Now, I'm just going to jump ahead. There we go. All right, perfect. I should know when I need to stop. Now, the other thing I want to talk about that I think is really important, at least for this video, I'm going to try to split up videos in little bits so they're a little bit more palatable. And so you can watch a 10 or 15-minute video, 3 of them in a row, instead of trying to watch like one 45-minute video, which would strain my attention. Is that you usually have trial courts and appellate courts. Now, trial courts is everything that you've ever watched on TV. It's Law and Order. It's My Cousin Vinny. Whatever you kids are watching these days when it comes to court. But the essential idea, it's the most common form of litigation. It's 2 people who come up, they present all their evidence, and the judge or the jury decides what that outcome is, right? Now, the thing I want to note about a lot of the decisions you're going to read is that in a lot of ways, the trial court can resolve a case without needing a full trial. And the word there is called summary judgment. And what summary judgment says is that you tell the court, we've made all the factual determinations. We know what's going on. Everyone says the exact same thing. Court, just tell us the answer. And that's going to, I think, both of the cases that you have today. They are summary judgment motions, meaning every side agrees with what happens. Every side acknowledges that that's what happened. And they're just telling the court, apply the law as is. So in general, when you read both those cases, I want you to be able to understand what is the law and how has the court applied it. That's the most important thing. The other types of decisions we're probably going to be reading is appellate court decisions, which is the next level after litigation. Now, these type of decisions usually resolve questions of law, meaning an appellate court's looking at a trial court and trying to say, what's the mistake here? Is there an issue? Is there a problem? They don't retry the case. That's a common misconception, where if you lose at the lowest level and the holding is that, hey, you went through a red light, and you're like, I swear I didn't go through that red light. That is a factual decision, whether you drove through or not. So the idea there is the factual determinations are usually non-appealable. It's usually only a legal mistake. So usually they only use judges, there's no witnesses, and they just read the facts as is. You're going to read some cases in class that are factual, some cases that are legal. So trial court decisions and appellate court decisions. The number one thing I can tell you, though, and I want you to write this down, circle it with a highlighter and underline it, boldface it, whatever you have to do. In the decisions I give you, I do care what happened, right? I don't care a lot, but I do care that you understand in general what happened, especially for this week. But the main thing I want, and more than anything else, is what is the law and why did the law create the outcome that it created? If you can answer that question, meaning the rationale section for both of your case briefs, you're perfectly fine. But that is where I want you to strive for. That's what I want you to be shooting for. So those are the main things I want to cover as a matter of background. The next video, we're going to talk about the understanding of statutes, the Constitution, and case law. And what I would ask you to do is go onto the privacy handout that's found on Canvas Web, and we're going to go through that a little bit just to kind of cover the different things and how to read the Constitution, how to read legislative laws, and how to read statutes. So I'll see you guys in a second.